Well, I'd like to start by making sure we first give a great round of applause to the Tiger Squadron for that great flyover this morning. Now, we rehearsed some of our program earlier this morning, and because of the wind, we lost one tuba player, two clarinets, and two children. We're seeing just... So I might, if you feel like you're going to get blown away, just hold on to your seat real tight, and we'll bear with it. Well, good morning to everyone. For those I've not had the chance to meet, my name is John Heibush, and I've got the honor of being the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. Thank you. Before we begin our formal program this morning, there's some special guests I'd like to make sure we recognize. And I'd like to start with the Reagans, Michael, Colleen, and Ashley Reagan. If you all could stand, Michael. And thanks for coming, Michael. From our Board of Trustees, the best governor California's ever had, except maybe for one, Governor Pete Wilson. I know this is the best congressman this library's ever had for 24 years, former Congressman Elton Gallegly and his wife Janice. We're also blessed, it's a special day to have with us 7 of President Reagan's former military aides. Please stand so we can thank all of you for your service. Last but not least, I hope he's here in the audience somewhere, but Duke Blackwood, the director of the Reagan Library. Duke, there you are. And of course, a very special thank you to all the men and women here today from Camp Pendleton, who, a round of applause for them. They literally surround you today. They've been so much help for today's celebration. This is the Reagan Library's 12th year working in conjunction with Camp Pendleton to pay tribute to President Reagan on his birthday, and we are honored to have the support of our fighting men and women from such a vital military installation. On behalf of everyone here, and I am sure all Americans, thank you each and every one for your service. And now on to today's program in honor of the 105th birthday of Ronald Wilson Reagan. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would, please rise for the March on the Colors, the playing of our national anthem, and the invocation by Chaplain Christopher Maris, Captain, United States Navy.
Let us pray. Of the many reasons, Lord, to pay respects to the 40th president, his many accomplishments, his character, his leadership, for me, it's his love of, well, dirt. Dirt that cakes on your boots or the back of your neck because you've worked hard in it all day. Touching on his fondness for the outdoors, someone wrote, "Land integrates you into life," which is to say, dirt may be dirt, but it's also fertile. It gives life. Awkward then, Lord, as it may be, as we honor a great leader on his birthday, a servant of the land he loved, and who pointed out to others the greatness of this land, her blessed fortune. Awkward as it may be, we pray, Lord, that there be dirt in heaven, and chores enough by which the sweet feeling of grime being cleansed from the soul leaves the soul upright and whole. But then isn't that what it means to behold your face? The scrawny human soul cleansed and welcomed, made from mud, but destined to sit with angels. A grateful nation prays today, Lord, as President Reagan fervently prayed for the land we love. Out of her fertile soil of freedom, opportunity, and with your abundant grace, may America always bear the fruits of liberty for which he so earnestly and selflessly labored. Amen.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to introduce to you the Commanding General of the Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, Brigadier General Edward Banta.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this blustery day here at the Reagan Library. You know, John, you mentioned the wind and the effect that it had on a rehearsal earlier today. A couple of our Marines lost some covers that sailed off into the bushes here, and we had to recover them. So if I lose something, please, it's not intentional. But also a quick nod to the flying, or the Tiger Squadron today. It was a little sporty up there. We weren't sure whether they were going to be able to actually make the approach and fly over, but well done to our brothers in the air. So thanks. So good morning, everyone, and gosh, what an honor to be here. This is my second opportunity to participate in this event, and I think this year we have probably about double the crowd of last year. So for everyone who made it out today, to include our very honored guests that John, you acknowledged earlier, thank you for joining us here. It is truly a privilege for me to be here and serve as the presidential representative as we honor the 105th birthday of our 40th president. And on behalf of all the Marines and sailors of Marine Corps Installations West and Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, thanks for allowing us to do our part in honoring one of our great American heroes. My wife Molly is here accompanying me today, as is my Sergeant Major Scott Helms, and of course our command chaplain, Chris Maris, United States Navy. And as you can see and as you've heard, we're blessed to have some of your Marines here supporting the ceremony. So just to elaborate for a moment on the Marines who are here, Mr. Highbush, I know, acknowledged them, but we have the 1st Marine Division Band, we've got the Marine Corps Air Station Camp Pendleton Color Guard, and if you want a good workout, try holding the national ensign or a battle colors in this breeze. It's quite something. And then, of course, all the Marines that are here as part of the ceremonial and honor details from Camp Pendleton. They all volunteered to be here. They left at 4 o'clock this morning for the trek up here. And for all of you who came, thank you for your service and for being here today. And I'll tell you, as much of a pleasure and an honor it is for me to be here today at the library, I'm reminded of our president, our 40th president, every day that I'm at my command post back at Camp Pendleton. Because you see on the stairwell that goes up to my command deck, we've got a series of poster-size images that capture the history of the base. And the one at the top is my favorite. It's a large picture in sepia tone of President Reagan hunting on the base back in the early 1980s. He's wearing his trademark jeans, he's got a shooting vest on, a western shirt, and a ranch hat. And he's carrying a double-barrel shotgun on his shoulder with the index finger laid up beside the trigger guard in the ready safe position. And it's an iconic image, and one that captures his leadership, his grounded American values, and how our Marines remember and think of our former Commander-in-Chief. And for me, it's just a great way to start every day. So I'd like to take a few moments this morning to reflect on President Reagan's life of service, his leadership, and his legacy from the perspective of your Marine Corps. So as Marines, we've long prided ourselves on selfless service to the nation, to be part of the less than 1% of Americans who today wear the uniform of any of our armed services. And while service and defense of the nation is the loftier ideal, it's underscored by every Marine's compassion and commitment for their fellow Marine. And it's that bond and commitment between the Marine and his brother or sister to his left or right, and between the leaders and the led, that truly defines the life of service. And Ronald Reagan lived that life of service in a similar way, powered by his commitment to his fellow Americans. And he did serve in the U.S. Army very ably during the Second World War. And for anyone who attended this event last year, you may recall my opening story about President Reagan receiving an invitation, ostensibly from our commandant, to enlist in the Marine Corps. He gracefully declined, saying, "I'm sure my invitation came as a result of a Lance Corporal's overactive imagination. Nevertheless, please let him know that he honored me with believing that I have what it takes to become a United States Marine." And that's how he was. Always eloquent. Excuse me for a moment. Tactful, eloquent, and never petty. He served the nation's highest office, yet he never lost touch with or compassion for the American citizens whom he so ably led. So Marines put a high premium on leading by example, and President Reagan did so as well. When would-be assassin John Hinckley made an attempt at the president's life, it would have been completely understandable for the president to rest and recover from his injuries. But he had an American public watching and waiting for his direction, and he was back leading cabinet meetings in a few short weeks. So he's an incredible example to our current generation of wounded warriors. After 15 years of conflict, thousands of brave young men and women are battling to regain normalcy after fighting and being wounded in defense of our nation. And they can look to his example of sheer grit and determination as a roadmap to recovery. President Reagan's remarkable recovery made a profound statement about the American spirit, which he embodied throughout his presidency. I had the honor of serving under President Reagan when I first came in the Marine Corps back in 1986. As a second lieutenant, I felt like I had a lot of responsibility on my shoulders. Of course, it was relatively proportional at the time. But having someone with such unbreakable resolve and unwavering conviction at the helm of the nation fortified the hearts and minds of our Marines. And this was a time when our military had been plagued by low morale, low pay, and outdated equipment. But he rolled up his sleeves and he began fixing these problems. And the equipment and support our military enjoys today is directly linked to what President Reagan did for us during his presidency. Under his leadership, we saw a dramatic increase in Marine Corps end strength, a dramatically expanded Defense Department budget, and perhaps most importantly, and this is something that money could not buy, was a renewed pride and respect for wearing the cloth of our Corps in the defense of our nation. These are all part of the legacy that he left us through his presidency. Ladies and gentlemen, it's certainly my honor to serve as the Marine Corps Installations West Commander. And the region is special to me, and at Camp Pendleton, just a few hours drive south of here, to the 40,000 Marines and sailors who call Southern California home. And having this wonderful library, the Reagan National Library, accessible to our local Marine Corps community is so important. Our culture values history and carrying on the legacy of the great Americans who went before us. And while most of our active duty Marines are too young to have served under President Reagan, they all benefit from his legacy of leadership and service to the nation. In closing, it's my honor to be here today. On behalf of all the Marines and sailors of Marine Corps Installations West, happy birthday, Mr. President. Thank you very much. God bless. Semper Fidelis.
Thank you so much, General Banta. I had a chance to talk with General Banta upstairs right before the event, and I thought, he's a one-star general, and he's had his position at Pendleton for a couple of years, so I thought, okay, he's going to move up to another big base, maybe get another star, and I said, well, so where are you going? And just as typical of a United States Marine, he's going to Afghanistan. So we just want to wish you safe travels and Godspeed, General. We now have a very special treat for you. The United States has been honoring its nation's presidents by issuing $1 coins featuring their images in order in which they served in office. The United States Mint has been issuing 4 coins per year for several years. The Mint has also been releasing first spouse gold coins on the same schedule as the presidential $1 coins. We are so honored that the United States Mint has allowed us to unveil today, for the first time, the Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan coins. I am pleased to introduce Richard Peterson, Deputy Director of the United States Mint, to share some insight into the design of the coins. Richard's background is very diverse. He worked at a great company called General Electric for 11 years, a great, great partner of the Reagan Library. He's a former U.S. naval officer and was a nuclear-trained submariner and served on active duty from 1981 to 1992. During his remarks, as we prepare to unveil the coins, we will be joined in the front of the stage by Governor Pete Wilson and the artists of the coins to assist in the unveiling of the designs. Richard?
Thank you, John, and thank you to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation for inviting me to be here today. And thank you to General Banta and Mr. Fitzwater for being here as well. And Mrs. Reagan, a special hello to you. On behalf of the 1,700 men and women of the United States Mint, I bring you warm greetings from each of our 6 locations around the country, from our headquarters in Washington, D.C., to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where we protect the nation's gold, to our 4 mints in West Point, New York, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Now, 2016 is a big year for coins honoring President and Mrs. Reagan, and today we will unveil 3 beautiful designs. But just 6 weeks ago, legislation was enacted that creates another special coin, and I want to spend just a minute talking about that. Go back to the early 1980s when the country of South Africa introduced their gold Krugerrand coin. Now, at the time, that was the first gold coin in mass production. Investors around the world loved it because they could put it in their hand, they could put it in their safety deposit boxes. The United States had no such coin. Well, President Reagan wasn't going to stand for that. And in 1985, he worked with Congress and enacted the American Eagle Gold and Silver Bullion Program, which requires that the coins that we make today at the Mint be made of recently mined American gold and silver. And so we made our first coins in 1986, 30 years ago this year. Secretary Baker actually struck the first silver coins up at the San Francisco Mint. In the early years of the program, we sold 3 to 4 million ounces of gold and silver per year. Then around Y2K, that number went up to 5 to 7 million. And then when the economy turned down in 2008, investors around the world wanted a safe place to put their money, and they turned to American gold and silver. No safer place. In 2015, the Mint produced 49 million ounces of gold and silver. So that's 7 times what we were making just a few years ago. Our Mint in West Point is operating 24/7. The American Eagle Gold and Silver Program is the world's most popular bullion coin, the world's most popular coin program, all because of the vision of President Ronald Reagan. This year is the 30th anniversary of those coins. The Mint will be making a special anniversary edition. Around the edge of the coin will inscribe the words 30th anniversary. The West Point Mint is gearing up to produce those coins right now, and when we come back here in July for the July celebrations here at the library, we'll have those coins with us. President Reagan has other ties to the United States Mint. In 1981, he appointed Elizabeth Jones as the first woman to be the chief engraver of the Mint. He also appointed Donna Pope to be the director of the Mint. So for the very first time in American history, at the same time in 1981, on President Reagan's watch, and thanks to him, both the director of the Mint and the chief engraver of the Mint were women. In 1982, he enacted legislation to resume production of the commemorative coin program that had been absent for 28 years. And so since 1982, the Mint has generated over $500 million for worthy causes and organizations around the country, such as the March of Dimes Foundation, the United Negro College Fund, veterans organizations, and many, many more. Ladies and gentlemen, personally to me, it's a highlight to be here today. As John mentioned, I spent my Navy career driving fast attack nuclear submarines around the ocean. For those who remember the Cold War, the submarines were a pretty big part of it. I personally carried out orders that were issued directly by President Reagan. My staff reminds me that I can't talk about them, so I won't. And then I went to General Electric. President Reagan was at General Electric, and if you can remember the General Electric Theater. And now I'm at the Mint, where not a day goes by that we aren't touched in some way by the vision and foresight of President Ronald Reagan. In one way or another, he's been with me every step of my career. I really couldn't imagine it any other way. So John, I'm indebted to you and to the foundation for having me here today. Now we have some business to attend to, and we have to unveil these designs. So everyone knows that there are 2 sides to every coin. The obverse side is typically referred to as the head side, and features a portrait of the individual being honored. The reverse side is known as the tail side. And so as John mentioned, on the presidential dollar coin series, obviously the obverse is a portrait of the president. And on the reverse, it's common for all the coins, and it includes an image of Lady Liberty holding her torch. I will say that the presidential $1 coins are made of copper, nickel, and a little bit of manganese. Then, John mentioned that the Congress wanted to honor the first spouses, those gracious ladies whom we all know are the ones who really make things happen. Rather than being copper, nickel, or manganese, these coins honoring the first spouses are made of 24-karat gold, reflecting the value that the first ladies brought as they served alongside their husbands. So the first design we have here is on my right, and it is the obverse design of the Ronald Reagan Presidential $1 coin. Mr. Richard Masters designed this distinguished portrait of President Reagan. Mr. Masters is here with us as well. The coin was engraved, and in the minting language, that means you sculpt it and add the 3-dimensional relief. And that was engraved by Mr. Joe Mena, one of our engravers at the Philadelphia Mint. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to present the presidential $1 coin honoring President Ronald Reagan. Our next design is the obverse of the Nancy Reagan First Spouse gold coin. Mr. Benjamin Sowards designed this striking portrait of Mrs. Reagan, and we're pleased that he could join us as well. Again, this coin was engraved by mint engraver Joseph Mena. Ladies and gentlemen, the obverse of the Nancy Reagan first spouse gold coin. Our final design today is the reverse of the Nancy Reagan first spouse gold coin. Mr. Joel Iskowitz created this design, and it was sculpted by the Mint's chief engraver, Don Everhart. Mr. Iskowitz is here with us today. The coin features a design of Mrs. Reagan with her arm around two children during her Just Say No to Drugs campaign. Ladies and gentlemen, the reverse of the Nancy Reagan first spouse gold coin. Ladies and gentlemen, in case you can't tell, I really love what I do at the United States Mint. It is a great government agency. I urge you to go to our website at usmint.gov, where you can purchase all of these coins as they become available this year, and check out our other products as well. Mrs. Reagan, to you, best wishes and God bless. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here today.
Thanks so much, Richard. Today's unveiling was very special. Here at the Reagan Library, we are dedicated to the preservation and promotion of Ronald Reagan's legacy of inspired freedom. Today's birthday celebration is just one example of how we do that. Inviting great Americans to join us on days like this is another. Marlin Fitzwater joined the Reagan administration in 1983 as Deputy Press Secretary, later becoming President Reagan's press secretary in 1987. Marlin was there when the Cold War came to a close and was present at the summit between President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev in 1987. I've been told that when a new chief of staff came on board at the White House in early 1987, he asked President Reagan if he wanted to bring a new lawyer and a new press secretary. The president agreed to a new lawyer, but refused to change out press secretaries, saying, quote, "I already have a press secretary that is doing a great job." Of course, he was speaking about Marlin Fitzwater. We could not think of a better speaker to honor President Reagan's legacy on this birthday. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the Reagan Library, Mr. Marlin Fitzwater.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I am delighted to be here today to celebrate the President's birthday. I recall standing in the glowing dusk of a Southern California shopping center back in 1984 as President Reagan was ending the last appearance of his campaign. And he was talking about, he wasn't talking about this wind, however. but he was talking about how much he loved America. And he began to tell the story of a French mother during the liberation of Paris at the end of World War II. And the president's voice began to change as he spoke. It grew strong and yet quiet. And as he described a mother who had endured years of untold hardship, his voice became her voice, and he told of the liberation and the young American soldiers who appeared at her doorway to ask about her safety and her welfare. She thanked America, and she thanked the American soldiers. He was a big strapping boy, she said. I don't remember his name, but he came from a place called Iowa. And as the crowd roared its approval, and at the same time was shedding tears, the president's chief of staff, Jim Baker, turned to me and said, Marlin, no other president could ever do that. But if you think President Reagan could tell stories, you should have heard him speak of his love of country, his appreciation for historic leadership in America, our Christian heritage, our concern and respect for women's rights, our belief in the rule of law, our interest in promoting freedom around the world, and the basic goodness of the American people. Ronald Reagan believed in all these values, and he spoke of them often. They were the bedrocks of his trust and confidence in America. In perhaps the most decisive and crucial period of his public life, the summit meetings with Mikhail Gorbachev in the last 2 years of his presidency, President Reagan again spoke of values. I would like to briefly focus on just 3 days in President Reagan's life, May 29 to 31st, 1988, in Moscow. The president was determined to speak to the Soviet people about freedom and life in America and the opportunities that could be theirs as they were exploring new ways to live and new forms of government. On the first day, our staff gathered in the lobby of the American Embassy to greet the President and Mrs. Reagan on that first day of activities. The President had told our staff many times that he wanted to take an opportunity to meet the Soviet people, and he decided he wanted to do it now. Now, when the citizens of Moscow were all around him, just a few steps away in a public square, and in huge apartment buildings within shouting distance. But the KGB and the Secret Service said they were skeptical. They were not certain that they could protect the president under these circumstances. Our advance team had no plan. The Secret Service was reluctant. But finally the service was asked, can you protect us or not? Yes or no? The answer was yes. And the response from the President and Mrs. Reagan was, we go in 15 minutes. I'm telling you, bodies were flying out of that room like doves in a cornfield. We were all rushed to mobilize our respective constituencies. The press, the Secret Service agents, the embassy staff, the Soviet government, the local police. And moments later, the President and Mrs. Reagan walked out the door and headed down the street to the Arbat shopping area. Street artists and vendor carts were in the square. People were strolling with children and baby carriages. The President of the United States and his wife walked into the middle of this crowd and started shaking hands. Almost immediately, people began shouting, Reagan, Reagan. And I looked up at these 8 to 10-story apartment buildings in the middle of Moscow, and faces were in every window. Then I looked to the doors, and people were streaming out and running toward the president. I looked for the president, and I couldn't find him in the crowd. And then suddenly he appeared, standing on a vendor's cart, smiling with enthusiasm and speaking to the people of the Soviet Union. This is what he came for. He brought them greetings from the people of America. And suddenly it was a crowd of thousands, laughing, shouting, waving, and holding their babies high to see this American leader. The president had several more messages to deliver in the succeeding hours of those 2 to 3 days. He had built a mosaic of public events over the next 3 days to tell America's story. They started with a reception at the embassy residence for more than 90 human rights advocates, dissidents, refuseniks who had all been persecuted or jailed for their beliefs. And President Reagan wanted to add his voice to those who were speaking out. Perhaps never before had such a group gathered with an American president. If I may, he told the Soviet dissidents, I would like to share with you the main aims of our human rights agenda. And they were tears in every eye. He had just demonstrated one of those freedoms in the Arbat, the freedom of assembly. And then he spoke in the Danilov Monastery in a country which was officially atheist. And he spoke of the freedom of religion. I'm hopeful the Soviet government will permit all the peoples of the Soviet Union to worship their creator as they themselves see fit in liberty. And then the next day, the president faced one of the great challenges of his mission to present his ideas to youth, to the young people of Russia. And he went to Moscow State University. And when I first walked in the hall, I saw that the Soviets had planned a special welcome for our president. They had placed a 20-foot statue of Vladimir Lenin right behind his speaking podium. Actually, I was nervous, but I was rather delighted because I knew that Ronald Reagan would appreciate the special ironies presented by this location. Mr. Lenin, for more than an hour, would have to stare at the backside of perhaps the greatest political communicator in modern history. And our president was ready. I give you one paragraph from that great speech. Freedom, the president said, is the right to question and change the established way of doing things. It is the continuing revolution of the marketplace. It is the understanding that allows us to recognize shortcomings and seek solutions. It is the right to put forth an idea, scoffed at by the experts, and watch it catch fire among the people. It is the right to dream, to follow your dream or stick to your conscience, even if you're the only one in a sea of doubters. And after the last working meeting of the summit, President Reagan and Chairman Gorbachev agreed to a walk in Red Square, no doubt in front of Lenin's tomb, and most assuredly in front of the world. The television cameras were set, and Ronald Reagan knew exactly what he wanted to say. He only had one message to deliver. The world is changing, he said. I no longer believe the Soviet Union is the evil empire. He had been framing this message in his mind for some time, and he spoke to Soviet citizens in the Arbat, Christians in the monastery, Soviet students at the university, dissidents in the reception, and Mr. Gorbachev himself. He knew this was the time and place, and he did it. There is a picture from that scene that day of a blonde male, young KGB agent in those groups of people in Red Square with President Reagan that day. It looks a lot like Vladimir Putin. And I think it was. Mr. Putin denies it, but I think it does symbolize the idea that uncertainty always lurks in the background. And Russia has changed much in the last 25 years, but Ronald Reagan's words remain strong and true, and I believe they will guide America's belief forever. President Reagan also had a sense of timing that would always catch the crest of history. The great leaders have that ability. And he did it with a strong and gentle voice that was always civil. He seldom condemned his critics. He always conducted himself as president of all the people. When he sought to console the youth of America after the death of our astronauts on the Challenger space shuttle in 1986, he said, "I want to talk today to our school children." And he said, "The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted, it belongs to the brave." Ronald Reagan lived his life among the brave, and he always will. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marlin. Thank you for coming all the way from the Chesapeake, and thank you for your service to our country. Please rise for the laying of the wreath and honors to President Reagan. The President of the United States has directed that a presidential wreath be laid at the resting place of all former presidents on the anniversary of their birth. Brigadier General Edward Banta, Commanding Officer, Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, is designated to place a wreath at the tomb of the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan, on February 6th, 2016, in honor of the 105th anniversary of his birth and in tribute to his distinguished service to a grateful nation. At this time, I would like to invite President Reagan's former military aides to step forward and lay a wreath. Please remain standing for the retiring of the colors. We'd like you to remain in place until the conclusion of the ceremony. This will conclude our ceremony, but then before I thank you all for coming and bid you goodbye, you should know that President Reagan's birthday cake will now be served in the Presidential Learning Center over here to my left. If you're still here at 1:45 today, we want to invite you to join us in front of the Air Force One Pavilion for the unveiling of a brand new Ronald Reagan statue entitled Along the Trail. We have added honor and pleasure to not only have the sculpture of the statue with us today, Mr. Don Reed, but the donors, such as Mrs. Diane Hendricks, who made the vision of this exquisite piece a reality. Please see if you can find a moment in your schedule today, because it is a remarkable, remarkable statue to President Reagan. Thank you very much. This concludes our program.